I'll call the East Lyme Board of Selectmen regular meeting to order. If you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Welcome. Today's December 5th, 2018. Additional agenda and consent items, are there any?
No.
I don't believe so. Delegations, would anyone like to speak to the Board of Selectmen this evening on any subject? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll move on. We have approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of November 21st.
Move to approve the regular meeting minutes of November 21st, 2018 as submitted.
Second?
Any comments, questions, corrections? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
Abstain?
Yes, ma'am. Consent calendar.
Move to approve the consent calendar for the meeting of December 5th, 2018 in the amount of $3,119.35.
Second?
Motion and been seconded twice. Any comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Great. Old business is up first this evening. That's how we do it. So the fishing dock leases, you have applications, and I believe in your packet for, I think 7 applications or so. We were informed by the state we will lose that one of the docks. We have 4 down there. Let's remind everyone, we have 4. And one of them is close to the bridge. And the state will be doing a major bridge project, and they will be taking that, at least during the bridge project. So I'm gonna recommend not putting the lease out for that until the project is over. So we're down to 3 docks. One of them is locked in for a long-term lease, the Black Hawk. So he is not one of your applicants, nor is he up for a renewal. He also pays substantially much more for his space. We have, like I said, about 6 or 7 applications for 2 slots. And what I'd like to do is recommend 3 of us to sit down as a subcommittee, go over the applications and score them, and decide on the merits of the application and the need for these spaces. If anyone would like to volunteer, I'd be on that. And I don't know if there's any interest from the group. I can even do it with one more.
I'll volunteer.
Okay. Mr. Daigle, Mr. Nickerson.
I would, but I thought I'd give Dan and Roseanne a
Yeah.
chance. I didn't know.
I'll
Okay, I
do
think,
it.
That'd be
okay.
great. Thank you. Thank
Good.
you. And we'll,
Unless Roseanne, unless you want to, I don't want
I'm not into fishing.
to. Okay.
run into a fishing expedition.
The 3 of us.
Great, so the gentleman to my left, and we need to kind of do that, maybe next week.
Yeah.
We'll pick a time, maybe after the meeting, and
Sounds good.
find time to do that. It shouldn't take us a whole long time. We know many of the applicants. And then we can put a notice out before the next meeting that we decided on and all
I
that.
would like you to know that I did try, but it was about taking them off the hook. I couldn't do it.
That's a tough one.
So, better have somebody else besides me.
Sorry, Charlie. Okay. Oh, boy. So thank you for volunteering. We'll go over those leases and go from there, and we'll create some parameters. And of course, we've been looking for full-time fishermen, and there's other parameters to be considered, like local people. That's really all on the fishing leases. I know we got 3 boats being represented tonight, so thank you for coming out. More to be revealed. Those leases do renew on the first of the year, so we want to get moving on those as quickly as possible.
Would you expect recommendations then at our second meeting this month?
We'll be bringing recommendations to the second meeting. That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Please keep those applications for the two, and
Mhm.
Mr. Salerno too, so that we don't have to reprint those, so you'll be able to refer to those at the next meeting. New business tonight is a presentation of the land use group regarding the climate adaptation and sustainability study. Gary, you the lead on this? Mr. Gaishel?
Hi, good evening. So we started last, at the beginning of the year, we applied to Circa we were awarded $50,000 to undertake a climate adaptation and resiliency study. Tonight we have Nels Nelson. He's with Stantec, the consultant on the project. He's a senior planner with them in their Urban Places group. He holds a master's in environmental management, certified as a lead neighborhood development professional, also as an Envision Resilient Infrastructure professional, and by the state of Massachusetts, he is also a municipal vulnerability preparedness service provider. He's also contributed to several resiliency projects, including those in New Orleans and Old Saybrook. He and his team have been working throughout the year with the land use staff in Circa on the grant funding and the project itself. I think we've done a pretty good job of fulfilling the grant requirements. So Nels Nelson, without further ado, I'll give him the stage, and he'll provide you with about a 10-minute presentation, possibly less.
While we're getting the presentation up, I'd also like to recommend my co-author, Alex Felsen from Yale, who just got here, so that's great. What happened to the presentation? Okay, we'll let Gary sort through that. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here tonight with the Board of Selectmen of East Lyme. We're having this presentation now because the deadline for the results of the grant is the end of this calendar year. So it's been really wonderful to work with the town staff throughout this process, and they've been very supportive in terms of getting us information and meeting with us and talking with us, so that we're able to deliver within the requirements.
Let me know when you're
Let's go
ready
to the
to
next
put that
slide.
back up.
Yeah, we'll be referring to a presentation. So you can see we're right towards the end of this process. The team members are myself, Larissa Brown, and Alex. Go to the next slide. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the new climate science, what other communities are doing, what the state's doing about that, and finally end with some recommendations for the town of East Lyme. So looking back to 1936, there's been tide gauge data in Connecticut, and it shows an increasing sea level, about 1 inch every 6 years. Next slide. The University of Connecticut has extrapolated upon that and looked at other climate models. And based upon that, they think that by 2050, there's a very good chance that you'll see 20 inches of sea level rise, which is quite significant. And there's a cautionary threshold of around 3 feet, looking further out than 2050. So that's the very quick update to the climate science. Now we're going to talk about how that impacts East Lyme. And so here's a really quick rundown of some terminology. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Administration. It administers NFIP. NFIP is the flood insurance program. That is based upon FIRMS. FIRMS are the flood insurance rate maps, which talks about flood areas, and that's delineated with BFEs. BFE is the base flood elevation at the 1% annual chance storm. So that's the 1 in a 100-year storm. Based upon all that, you have requirements to elevate your home above the BFE based on or from FEMA. Above that, we have this thing called freeboard, which is a safety factor expressed in feet above BFE. And then on the firm, there's different zones. The AE zone is areas without wave heights or very small wave heights. The coastal AE has moderate wave heights, and the VE has larger wave heights. All right, so that's a quick rundown of the terminology. Now, what are other communities in Connecticut doing with this information? There's kind of a difference in terms of flood hazard between the East Sound and the West Sound, with more flood risk in the East Sound. And you can see that a lot of the neighboring communities already have a freeboard requirement. So that's BFE plus X number of feet. And this has been going on for years, where communities have been updating their flood ordinances. And East Lyme is a little red dot in that sea currently. So how many structures in East Lyme would be affected by this? Right now there are 639 buildings in FEMA flood zones. And those are all the red dots along the coast and along your inland waterways. Looking forward, with up to 20 inches or even more of sea level rise, there could be more impacted structures, especially in the low-lying areas that are circled there. So, based upon the climate science and what other communities are already doing in terms of updating their ordinances, the state recently passed a bill regarding climate change. And basically what it establishes is a single sea level change scenario for the state, which is that 20 inches that I discussed earlier. And then the freeboard requirements for state projects are a full 2 feet. So even those 20 inches, they say every state project is going to be 2 feet above BFE. Plus, they say that within 10 years, they're going to update the sea level scenario. So maybe there's a change, maybe there's not a change, but at least they've built in the flexibility to continually go back and take a look at how the projections are changing. So that's what the state recently passed this summer. So this study recommends policies and also takes a quick look at some of the priority projects. And the priority projects were really established by looking at the literature from some of the previous studies done in East Lyme, for example, from the Nature Conservancy, and also talking to your staff. So let's take a quick look at the policy recommendations first. So the first policy recommendation is to, in your flood ordinance and in your zoning regulations, adopt a base flood elevation of plus 2 feet and tie yourself to the state's definition of a sea level rise scenario. So you'll be in lockstep with other state programs, and in the future, if there's drastic changes in the predictions, it'll already be written into your ordinance that you're going to follow what the state recommends. In talking with Bill and other people in the town, what we learned is that a lot of the structures that are being elevated already have this amount of freeboard, or it's already being recommended to them. So it's not really a big break from what's currently happening in practice in East Lyme. And the reason why a lot of people have been taking freeboard above BFE is because it has a very quick payback period. You'll see in the graphic on the right that if you have freeboard, your NFIP premiums go down significantly. So it actually pays for itself pretty quickly. And so this would just be to make it a blanket policy for all structures being elevated in East Lyme. The one tricky part about that is demonstrated in this graphic. So if you have a building and then all of a sudden you have to have freeboard and you're raising that building, you might go above the height limit. Currently in East Lyme, that's handled on a case-by-case scenario with the zoning commission. Other communities, I think 8 of them in the state of Connecticut, have granted some kind of relief for elevating structures. It's really up to the community what you think about height along your coast, if you want to preserve views or if you want to grant these homeowners some relief. If there's really not that many that are actually coming forward as having this problem, maybe it's best to keep it in zoning commission. But if all of a sudden hundreds are going to be elevated, we would recommend to have a single policy that is applied evenly. All right. So the second big policy recommendation is to adopt a definition of coastal AE zones. So what is a coastal AE zone? It's not where the waves are really big and it's not where the waves are really small. It's that middle area. Previously, the policy has been to treat the area of moderate wave action as if it was in the area of low wave action. However, in October, the state just passed their new building code, and they're requiring buildings in the coastal AE zone to be treated as if they were in the VE zone. The biggest change in that regard is that when you're elevating a structure, you're not elevating it just above the base flood elevation, but you're elevating the lowest structural member. So you have to go a little bit higher to get out of the waves. Really, the town of East Lyme doesn't have a ton of say in this because it's part of the state building code. But what you really should do is just update your zoning so that you're in lockstep with the state. And this is pretty straightforward. And then the last policy recommendation is to update your process for applications for building in flood zones, so that the expectations are all there and the requirements are all there, and people can proceed through quickly. For example, there had been some problems about how you assess or appraise market value in structures. Just clarify that all in a checklist, and then put that on your website so that people can apply. I guess the last other piece of policy recommendation is to include a resilience chapter in your POCD update, which we will provide recommendations for. All right, so now about non-policy projects in East Lyme. One of the things we heard and saw is that some of your pump stations are in flood hazard areas, and so we recommend taking a close look at that. And Gary just told me that he's already forming some kind of partnership around doing that with students potentially.
Yes, with Yukon Clear, Bruce Hyde, I met with him today and briefly talked. He's looking to he's got a group of students that they're looking to do independent study projects, and they're indicated that they would be able to do a critical infrastructure analysis as to the vulnerability of those structures within our town, and possibly also provide some students to help with the POCD update. So all in timing, being that our POCD is due up next year for an update. So this is all kind of coming together very fluidly. So I'm pleased with that, and I think we have a really good opportunity ahead of us.
Okay, so that's the critical infrastructure. The next one is a kind of a series of priority projects that include addressing some drainage issues, altering some roadways to adapt to the rising sea level, and living shorelines projects. And so the drainage projects are not actually that numerous. We understand there's a problem at Hope Street. There's also an area that could be solved with a backflow preventer underneath a railroad culvert to eliminate some part of a flood zone there. Yep. The roadway projects are mostly low roads that are also critical egress routes. For example, getting out of Giants Neck, West Main Street. And then there's some outliers like Crescent Beach, where Atlantic Ave and Ocean Street are very low and could potentially be turned into something else over time. And we talked with the Crescent Beach people about that. And this is a graphic that just shows an overlay of some of those critical roadway improvements with your evacuation routes. So, for example, Bush Hill Drive, those people are in an evacuation area, and right now it can only egress by vehicle over a very low road over water. Okay, last important slide is living shorelines. So, in speaking with your staff and looking at previous plans, Beach enhancement at the Niantic Bay Boardwalk is recommended, and so that could be helping to foster more growth of dune grass, which I hear is naturally occurring, potentially using snow fencing, other techniques, a breakwater out there. There has been a recommendation to purchase some new open space land around the Patagonia River for marsh enhancement. As the sea level rises, the marsh is going to expand to new areas. And then as a policy, you should really try and have more native shoreline plants around the coastal areas so you can control erosion and runoff, as opposed to having a hardened shore or let's say grass right up to the ocean. And finally, there are funds available for acquiring for sale damaged properties after floods for conservation. So that'd just be something to have in your toolbox for when there has been a big flood and people are trying to offload property. Get that so that you can put it into conservation. Next. We made an implementation matrix. It's in the report. It'll be in the final report. You can take a close look at how different responsibilities are assigned, what the priorities are. I'm not going to go through that now. But just to say, you're not alone. There are a lot of implementation funding sources out there for different types of projects, and we'd be really happy to look at some of these with you and apply and see how we can keep on working with East Lyme to build your resilience in this community. So thank you for your time. Hopefully that wasn't too long, and I'm interested in hearing your questions.
Great. Absolutely. Thanks, folks. Questions? Look, one major component is the zoning piece, it would seem. You've already looked over this bill, and is your plan and our zoning department, can we get together on that? And is it an easy fix, Bill?
It's an easy fix. We're ready to go Muhammad.
How
It's
much
an easy fix.
That's all
Like I know people that email from DEP advising us of the change in the building code, recommending we adopt those regs into our zoning code. So I've already started that process.
Yeah.
To match the building code, we're already advising our clients of those changes. I actually met with somebody today who's doing a major project. I think actually the team buying sold a house.
Mm.
And we have some team issues. So we're doing a lot of those things already. The zoning regs name the building official and the zoning official. The town ordinance also does the same thing. We're talking about maybe one person, if you get some confusion in the application, that's something to be determined as we move forward. But we continue to apply the regs as we have for many, many, many years. And they were updated several years ago by FEMA through DEP and made those modifications. So they're continually being upgraded. And the industry, as you can see, is currently fluid. They continue to update as we see these big storms nationally. FEMA continues to make recommendations and upgrade. Much of it driven by the insurance companies, which is a natural progression.
Right.
Given all the storm damage we have. But yes, we're paying attention. We have been discussing some of these things.
If I get much more, I gotta get you on a microphone if you go much longer.
So we're spending more
'Cause
time
they're not
on
hearing
the
you.
regs is what
Yeah.
is the bottom line
Yeah, okay.
these days. So yes, we're paying attention. We're working on
Then we
it,
gotta
so we will continue.
implement this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Questions?
Yes.
Roseanne?
Would you recommend one of our commissions, either zoning or planning, or inland wetlands, sending letters to individual property owners in these areas to make them aware if they're considering any renovations or anything of that nature? How have other communities gone about informing residents in areas such as this?
Yeah, that's a good question. The communication around climate change wasn't exactly part of the scope of this assignment, but I think that the risks have to be communicated somehow. And so whether that's on the town website or a flyer, I think that's a really good recommendation, and we can get back to you, maybe include as an action item how to communicate or to communicate the
So
the
it would be
risks.
sufficient to have some kind of group information as opposed to being, having the responsibility for notifying individual homeowners. Is that your approach?
Yeah.
So through this,
You're gonna have to get on mic too, but I can
Yeah,
send
sure.
one down that way.
Bill Mulholland again. We have a CRS program which is run by Victor, our town engineer, and has been for a while, where we communicate to those people in special flood hazard areas. The town is awarded points for running a program of outreach as to what you're speaking to. We do that. And as a result of that, if we meet certain thresholds, the public, those in the flood zone, get a reduced rate on their insurance. And we are, I think, are rated at an 8. You can't get below a 7 in Connecticut. So we've been doing those things. I recently became certified in that program, as did our previous building official. In the spring, we took a week-long course in New London run by FEMA, and it was quite arduous. And Victor is currently running that program, and he keeps me in the loop as to what he's doing, but we do that type of outreach to keep our points and to keep the program going. So it is being done, but on that side of the aisle, and there's a number of us working together to kind of push this whole thing forward, because it actually takes a bit of time of my time, the building official's time, Victor's time, sometimes Gary's time. So collectively, we move the program forward. You'll find the regulations in zoning and the town ordinance, but it takes all of us to move it forward. And now the building code has been modified to reflect some changes as adopted in the state of Connecticut, which was discussed earlier. And we're applying those as well with the additional free board and the AE zones now being reflective of the V zones. So we do all those types of things.
Thank you.
If I could hitch on to that question, I have no problem with new zoning regs and building regs for new builds being built properly to new standards, 2050 and above, 2 feet up. And the terminology already escapes me. I'm glad you gave it to me in writing. But I'm concerned about our current homeowners
Exactly.
that might want to redo their kitchen.
Right.
They want to do the update because the house has been out there for 80 years. They need to do the update. Does this mean that they got to lift their house up 3 feet or 2 feet or 8?
In the regulations, they have a portion which we apply called substantial improvement, and that's when you can improve your home up to 50% of the market value as established by an appraisal, by a certified appraiser, of just the home, not the land. So if your home is worth $200,000, you're allowed to 50% of that value at $100,000 over a 10-year period. And we have to keep track of that in each file for each home
Right.
as they make those changes. And once we get to the 10 years, we can start over. That's part of the FEMA program. So once you go over that 50%, you now have to elevate your home if you're in a flood zone and meet today's standards. So there are some forgiveness in the program.
Yeah.
The debate is always establishing the market value of the home and the estimates from the contractors.
Right.
They can cover a very broad spectrum. If we think the home is $300,000, the appraisal could come in at